Welcome to our study of how different groups prioritize values for responsible AI. My name is Maurice Jakesch, and I'm presenting results of a collaboration with Zana Bucinca, Saleema Amershi, and Alexandra Olteanu. Our study starts with guidelines for responsible or ethical AI, like the one you see here showing Microsoft's AI principles. Quite a few such guidelines have been published recently. They're coming from private companies, public sector organizations, academic groups, and they're proposing values or principles that their authors find important for the responsible development of AI. Anna Jobin has done a review of such guidelines. She and her co-authors coded the values guidelines mentioned, shown in this table. They find that most guidelines center on a set of principles related to transparent and just systems that do no harm, act responsibly, and respect people's privacy. These AI ethic guidelines, they seem to agree with each other. But we wanted to know whether they reflect values that a wider public cares about. If we asked a representative population who will interact with AI systems and may be affected by them, what values would they emphasize? And also, would groups underrepresented in the AI development process prioritize values differently? So we set out to answer these questions. We choose an empirical, quantitative approach. While it doesn't quite offer the rich insights that other methods provide, it would allow us to work with large representative samples, detect small differences and correlations with demographic attributes, and even integrate our approach with existing crowdsourcing infrastructures. For our method, we adapted the Schwartz value survey. It's an instrument that has been used by economists, psychologists, and sociologists to study individual and cultural differences in human values. I'm showing a part of the Schwartz value survey here to give you an impression, and will now tell you how we adapted it to responsible AI. To apply the Schwartz value survey to AI ethics, we needed to develop an AI value inventory first. We included values that, according to the review, were commonly mentioned in AI ethics guidelines, and added performance as another key metric in the AI development. Here you see our value inventory, as well as the first task that participants completed. It's a value selection task, asking which values they found most important for AI systems in general. We also developed explanations of what these values mean in the context of AI. For that, we built on definitions found in guidelines, and we further refined these in pilot studies to make sure they were understood by a general, non-technical public. Next, we asked participants about the importance of these values in specific scenarios. We know that context matters for normative judgment, and that it's easier to make value judgments in specific situations than in the abstract. To elicit value judgments in specific situations, we developed 4 scenarios of AI systems: medical, marketing, and media or banking, and then asked participants about the importance of a value in the given scenario. To increase robustness, we looked at people's value priorities from a third angle. What do people think developers should do when 2 values conflicted in a certain scenario? Here we reviewed the literature and combined 2 value explanations to frame a possible value conflict. Here's an overview of our procedure. We first provided participants a quick intro and then asked them which values they found most important in general. We introduced them to the deployment scenarios, and they confirmed their understanding of each scenario. They rated the importance of 7 values in different scenarios and provided their recommendations for developers in case of value conflicts. We also asked them about their demographics and their background, such as technical training or experiences with discrimination. To field the study, we recruited 3 different groups. first a US representative sample to understand what a general public cares about in responsible AI. Second, a sample of AI practitioners to see what values those who develop AI systems emphasize. And third, a sample of crowd workers to explore the feasibility of consulting their ethical judgments in the AI development process. What did we find? This graph shows the values participants selected as most important for AI systems in general. The x-axis shows the respective values, and the y-axis the percentage of participants selecting a value. Representative respondents are shown in black, crowd workers in yellow, and practitioners in blue. Representative participants here chose safety, performance, and privacy as the most important values most often. The values that crowd workers emphasized were largely aligned with the representative sample. But AI practitioners' references were less focused. Compared to the representative sample, practitioners selected humanist values such as fairness, inclusiveness, or dignity more often. Next, how important did participants find values in specific scenarios? Again, here the x-axis shows values, and the y-axis shows how often participants rated a value as very important or extremely important. Overall, we found that most people think these values are extremely important, but there were also differences across groups. In particular, practitioners rated values as less important than representative respondents did. We also saw significant variation in the importance of values across scenarios, which you can find in more detail in the paper. Finally, looking at participants' answers to what values developers should prioritize when in conflict. On the x-axis, top and bottom of the graph, I'm showing the two values that conflicted. On the y-axis towards the top, you see how many respondents prioritized the top value, and towards the bottom, you see how many respondents said that developers should prioritize the bottom value. If you look at the two conflicts on the left and right, we see a clear tendency in people's priorities. Across groups, participants said developers should prioritize privacy over performance and fairness, and safety over autonomy and transparency. There was more disagreement on the fairness-performance trade-off. Representative participants were split in their responses, half recommending to prioritize fairness and almost half recommending to prioritize performance. In comparison here, the majority of AI practitioners would prioritize fairness over performance. We dug a little deeper into this disagreement by analyzing whether certain demographic groups prioritized fairness or performance. I will have to point you to the paper for the full regression analysis, but here are some key findings. First, it is liberal respondents who tend to prioritize fairness over performance, and conservative respondents who tended to prioritize performance over fairness. Somewhat surprisingly, participants with experiences of discrimination were as undecided on the fairness-performance trade-off as other groups were. We also didn't find that people with technical training prioritize performance more than others. However, we found that women and Black respondents rated responsible AI values as more important in general than other groups did. Which brings me to the takeaways of this study. Our findings confirm a common concern, namely AI practitioners' value preferences differ from those of the general population. Their different value priorities show how important it is to pay attention to who gets to define what constitutes ethical or responsible AI. Second, responsible AI values are political. The disagreement that we found between liberal and conservative values lines up with a wider body of research on moral foundations that shows that liberals care about values related to individual rights, such as fairness, while conservatives do care about these values, but also care about group rights such as loyalty or authority. Finally, our results show that crowd workers could diversify normative judgment in the AI development process. They are already part of the AI development infrastructure, and their value priorities are aligned with those of our representative sample. Which brings me to the end of this presentation. A big shout out to my wonderful collaborators Zana, Bucinca, Saleema, Amershi, and Alexandra, Olteanu. Thank you very much for joining, and we're looking forward to your questions.